When the sky disappears, people stop asking whether they can win and start asking whether they will still exist tomorrow. On Caldera 9, the sky had vanished 3 hours earlier. Red Harbor had never been an important colony. It sat on the edge of mapped space, surrounded by iron-red deserts and jagged volcanic ridges that stretched for hundreds of miles beneath a copper-colored atmosphere. Fewer than 80,000 people lived there. Miners, farmers, mechanics, teachers, families who had crossed the stars searching for quiet lives. Quiet had ended at dawn. The first shadows appeared shortly after sunrise. Children walking to school stopped in the streets. Cargo pilots abandoned loading ramps. Farmers removed their hats and stared upward in silence. Something enormous was descending from orbit. Then another, and another. Within minutes, the heavens above Caldera 9 transformed into a ceiling of black metal. Thousands of alien warships drifted across the atmosphere, their immense hulls blotting out the morning sun. Entire neighborhoods fell into darkness. Emergency sirens echoed through Red Harbor as civilians hurried toward underground shelters carved decades earlier into the basalt bedrock beneath the colony. Inside the Colonial Operations Center, old ventilation fans rattled against concrete walls stained by years of dust and machinery oil. The facility had once coordinated planetary defense systems. Most people considered it obsolete. Jack Morrison knew better. The 43-year-old engineer stood alone before a wall of aging monitors, sleeves rolled up, gray beginning to spread through his dark hair. His coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago. He had not noticed. Above him, every display screen suddenly flickered. Static rolled across the room. Then a face appeared. Empress Valora Thane. She seemed impossibly calm. Silver-white hair framed elegant features. Golden eyes regarded humanity with distant authority. Behind her stretched the vast bridge of an imperial flagship large enough to overshadow entire cities. Her voice carried across every speaker on the planet. Citizens of Caldera 9, you now stand beneath the protection of the Orlith Empire. Resistance is unnecessary. Surrender your governmental authority, planetary infrastructure, and defense networks. Compliance guarantees preservation. She paused. Refusal guarantees isolation. The transmission ended. Silence followed. Not fear. Something heavier. Around Jack, colonial officials immediately began arguing. We cannot fight that. We need evacuation routes. There are no evacuation routes. Maybe surrender keeps everyone alive. Jack said nothing. He simply studied the orbital telemetry flowing across his monitors. The numbers looked impossible. Hundreds of capital vessels. Orbital interdiction platforms. Complete communication suppression grids. Caldera 9 had no chance militarily. A young communications officer approached him nervously. Mr. Morrison, the governor wants recommendations. Jack finally looked away from the screens. How many shelters remain unoccupied? The officer blinked. Sir, shelters. Jack repeated quietly. How many are still empty? 7, maybe 8. We are still counting. Jack nodded once. Keep counting. Outside, darkness deepened as another wave of Imperial ships entered low orbit. In the streets above, parents hurried children underground while dust blew through abandoned market squares. Far overhead, an empire waited for humanity to kneel. Deep beneath the colony, a quiet engineer opened a forgotten systems terminal that had not been activated in nearly 20 years. The screen glowed red. Accessing legacy protocols. Jack watched the message appear without expression. Then he whispered softly to the empty room. Not until everyone is safe. The countdown clocks appeared everywhere. Above the governor's chamber. Across public information screens. Even inside the underground shelters where frightened families waited beneath miles of volcanic stone. 19 minutes remained before the Orlith Empire expected an answer. Inside the Colonial Operations Center, the air smelled of dust, overheated circuitry, and stale coffee. Emergency generators hummed steadily beneath the floor. Jack Morrison sat before the forgotten defense terminal while ancient processors slowly awakened around him. One by one, monitors that had remained dark for decades flickered to life. Most of the younger technicians stared in confusion. I thought these systems were decommissioned, one whispered. Jack adjusted a cracked display panel without looking up. Officially, they were. The young technician frowned. Then why are they still here? Jack finally looked at him. Because some things are too important to throw away. Across the room, Governor Elaine Brooks paced nervously. She had spent the last hour speaking with community leaders, hospital administrators, and shelter coordinators. None of those conversations had improved her mood. "Current evacuation status?" she asked. A communications officer checked incoming reports. Shelter occupancy stands at 87%. 3 residential sectors remain exposed. Transportation delays continue in the western districts. Jack immediately turned. "How many people?" "Approximately 6,000. The governor closed her eyes briefly. "We do not have enough transport vehicles." Silence settled over the room. Everyone understood what that meant. Above them, an Imperial fleet large enough to conquer star systems waited patiently. Then every screen inside the operations center suddenly changed. Empress Veilora appeared once more. This time, she was not addressing the entire colony. She was speaking directly to Colonial Command. Behind her stretched towering observation windows overlooking endless ranks of warships suspended above Caldera 9. "Human authorities," she said calmly. "Your response window is narrowing." Governor Brooks stepped toward the transmission console. "Your Majesty, our colony contains civilians, hospitals, schools. We request additional time." Veilora regarded her silently for several seconds. "Time changes nothing." Her golden eyes moved across the command center. They stopped unexpectedly on Jack. Perhaps it was because he remained seated while everyone else stood. Perhaps it was because he looked more tired than afraid. "You are not military," the Empress observed. Jack shook his head. "No." "Then advise your leaders wisely." Veelora's voice remained composed, almost gentle. "The Orlith Empire does not seek unnecessary suffering. Surrender, and your people will be incorporated peacefully." Jack looked directly into the projection. "Will they remain free?" The bridge behind Veilora grew noticeably quieter. "Freedom," she answered carefully, "is often misunderstood by younger civilizations." Jack said nothing. Neither did the Empress. For a moment, 2 entirely different worlds simply regarded one another across impossible distance. Then the transmission ended. Around the operations center, worried voices immediately returned. Jack ignored them. He focused instead on the old terminal before him. New text had appeared across the glowing red screen. "Legacy Protocol Red Lantern ready. Authorization requires full civilian accounting." Jack opened shelter status reports one by one. Hospital census. School registries. Retirement community manifests. Every name mattered. Every missing person delayed activation. A volunteer coordinator hurried into the room moments later, breathing heavily. "Mr. Morrison," she called. "The last school transport just arrived underground. Sector 7 is clear." Jack finally allowed himself a slow breath. Outside, beneath the artificial night created by Imperial warships, the people of Red Harbor continued descending into safety. And deep below the colony, an old human engineer quietly prepared his answer. 10 minutes remained. Across Red Harbor, people measured those minutes differently. In Shelter 12, children counted ceiling lights because looking at frightened adults made them uneasy. Inside St. Miriam Medical Center, nurses checked oxygen reserves for the 4th time in an hour. In the Western Agricultural District, an elderly farmer locked his greenhouse and placed the key inside his grandson's hand. Above them all, the sky remained black. Inside the Colonial Operations Center, Governor Elaine Brooks stood beside Jack Morrison, studying the latest evacuation reports. 96% sheltered, she said quietly. "We are almost there." Jack nodded without looking away from his terminal. Rows of names scrolled endlessly across his screens. 80,000 lives. Every resident had to be accounted for before the old system would authorize activation. That requirement had seemed excessive 20 years earlier. Today, it felt sacred. A soft chime sounded. Another status update arrived. Sector 4 Retirement Complex confirmed secure, a communications officer announced. All residents transferred underground. Relief moved visibly through the room. Then alarms interrupted the moment. Orbital sensors detected movement. Massive movement. High above Caldera 9, hundreds of Orlith warships shifted formation simultaneously. On the primary display, Imperial vessels descended into lower orbit, their enormous silhouettes becoming visible even from the planet's surface. People emerging briefly from shelters later described it as watching mountains move across the sky. Moments later, every screen activated once again. Empress Veilora Thane appeared, standing beneath towering banners bearing the crest of the Orlith Empire. This time, her expression was different, less patient. "Citizens of Caldera 9, she said, her voice carrying calmly across the colony. 5 minutes remain. Behind her, stars reflected across the bridge windows of her flagship. The Empire has extended every courtesy required by interstellar law. Continued refusal serves no purpose." Governor Brooks stepped toward the transmission console. "Your Majesty, there are still civilians being relocated." Veilora remained silent for several seconds. "Human Governor, your people mistake delay for resistance." Her golden eyes shifted again toward Jack. "And yet your engineer continues working." The operations center grew still. Jack finally stood. Dust covered his sleeves. Fatigue lined his face. "People are still moving underground," he said simply. "Then your priorities are misplaced," Veilora replied. "Your civilization faces extinction." Jack shook his head gently. "No." The single word surprised everyone. Even the Empress seemed momentarily curious. "Explain." Jack looked around the operations center. Technicians, volunteers, teachers, mechanics, ordinary people who had not gone home in nearly 18 hours because strangers still needed help. "Extinction begins when people stop protecting each other," he said quietly. "We are not there yet." Silence followed, long enough that several officers aboard the Imperial flagship exchanged uncertain glances. Veilora studied the human carefully, as though seeing something she had not expected. "You still believe you can oppose an empire?" she asked. Jack looked toward the shelter reports still updating across his monitor. "No." He paused. "I believe we can protect our people." The transmission ended without another word. Deep beneath Red Harbor, the old defense terminal suddenly emitted a clear mechanical tone. "Final civilian accounting complete. Red Lantern authorization available." Jack closed his eyes briefly. Around him, no one spoke. Governor Brooks finally whispered, "What happens now?" Jack opened the final control interface. The screen glowed crimson, illuminating the tired faces surrounding him. Far above, an empire waited for surrender. Far below, humanity prepared a different answer. 1 minute remained. Deep beneath Red Harbor, the Colonial Operations Center had become almost completely silent. The arguments had stopped. The panic had faded. Even the emergency alarms seemed distant now, swallowed by the steady hum of ancient machinery awakening beneath the colony. Jack Morrison sat before the crimson control interface while thousands of status indicators glowed across the old terminal. Every shelter icon shined green. Every hospital had reported secure. Every school transport had arrived underground. 80,000 names. 80,000 lives. Accounted for. Governor Elaine Brooks stood beside him, arms folded tightly across her chest. "The Imperial deadline expires in 60 seconds, she said quietly. Jack nodded. "I know." Around the room, technicians watched him with uncertain expressions. No one truly understood what Red Lantern was. Most had never heard the name before that morning. A young systems engineer finally gathered enough courage to ask, "Mr. Morrison, is it a defense weapon?" Jack looked at the aging control panel. The metal surface had been worn smooth by hands long gone. "No," he said softly. "Not exactly." Above them, aboard the Imperial flagship Sovereign Dawn, Empress Veilora Thane stood upon her command platform overlooking the planet below. Caldera 9 appeared small beneath the endless formation of Orlith warships. "Final surrender window expires in 40 seconds, an officer reported. "No formal response has been received." Veilora remained perfectly still. Something about the human engineer unsettled her. Empires understood generals. They understood politicians. They even understood rebels. But the quiet human had shown neither fear nor defiance. He had only asked for time to protect people. That made him difficult to predict. "Open a direct channel to Colonial Command," she ordered. Moments later, Jack's face appeared upon the vast holographic display suspended above the bridge. He looked exhausted. Dust marked his clothes. Dark circles framed tired blue-gray eyes. Yet he appeared calm. "Human Jack Morrison," Veilora said, "the deadline has arrived. Does Caldera 9 surrender?" The entire operations center listened. So did thousands of Imperial officers. Jack remained silent for several seconds. Then he spoke. "Earth does not surrender people." A murmur spread across the Imperial bridge. Veilora's expression hardened slightly. Then you choose resistance. Jack shook his head. No. He placed one hand upon the old control panel. We choose remembrance. Before anyone could respond, he pressed the activation key. Nothing happened. No explosion. No weapons discharge. No planetary shields. Imperial officers exchanged confused glances. Then every sensor aboard every Orolith vessel simultaneously registered a massive energy surge rising from beneath Caldera 9's surface. Across the planet, dormant communication towers hidden beneath deserts, mountains, and abandoned mining stations awakened together for the first time in 20 years. In Red Harbor, children inside underground shelters looked upward as soft crimson light appeared across the ceilings. In hospitals, windows glowed red. Across farms, canyons, and distant settlements, ancient beacon arrays ignited one after another. Then the sky changed. Above Caldera 9, the entire atmosphere slowly transformed into a sea of luminous crimson stretching from horizon to horizon. Imperial warships drifted through red clouds reflecting against their black hulls until even the stars disappeared behind the glow. Every officer aboard the Sovereign Dawn stared in disbelief. The sky itself had become red. Empress Veilora stepped closer to the observation windows, golden eyes reflecting the impossible light surrounding her fleet. "Report," she whispered. No one answered immediately, because every screen aboard every Imperial vessel had suddenly begun displaying something far more astonishing than a weapon. They displayed names. The first name appeared on the central display aboard the Sovereign Dawn without explanation. Emily Carter. Age 8. Shelter 12. Severe asthma. Oxygen dependent. Then another appeared. Samuel Ortiz. Age 73. Retired teacher. Cardiac monitoring required. Then hundreds more followed. Thousands. Every Imperial screen, from command bridges to tactical stations, filled with an endless stream of human lives. Medical conditions. Shelter locations. Family registries. School enrollments. Emergency contacts. Entire biographies unfolded across military displays designed for war. Confusion swept through the Imperial flagship. "Your Majesty, we are unable to block the transmission," an officer reported. "The signal is embedded within civilian communication frequencies, planetary satellites, emergency beacons, and independent relay networks simultaneously." Another officer looked pale. "The transmission has also escaped the planetary system." Empress Veilora turned sharply. "Clarify. Red Lantern is broadcasting across open interstellar channels. Every major communication network within 600 light-years is receiving the signal." Silence consumed the bridge. On worlds far beyond Caldera 9, civilian observatories, commercial stations, and diplomatic outposts suddenly began receiving the same transmission. Entire star systems now watched the crimson sky above the human colony while reading the names of the people living beneath it. Deep below Red Harbor, Governor Elaine Brooks stared at the incoming reports in astonishment. "Jack," she whispered, "what exactly did you activate?" Jack Morrison remained seated before the glowing terminal. The red light reflected softly across his tired face. 20 years ago, during the Frontier Crisis, several human colonies disappeared before anyone could respond. He looked toward the ceiling, toward the crimson sky hidden beneath miles of rock. Afterward, Earth built Red Lantern. Around him, technicians listened quietly. It was designed to ensure that if a colony ever faced destruction again, no one would ever be able to claim they did not know who lived there. Above them, aboard the Sovereign Dawn, Empress Veilora continued reading. The names never stopped. Entire hospital manifests, kindergarten-class photographs, family recordings, volunteer registries. One image remained upon her display longer than the others. A group of children standing beside a greenhouse, smiling beneath a red caldera sunset. The accompanying text read, "Third-grade agricultural project. Harvest festival." For months earlier, Veilora looked away. "Military assessment," she demanded. A senior strategist answered carefully. "The human system possesses no offensive capability. No weapons have been activated. No shields detected." He hesitated. "However, any military action taken now will occur under complete public observation." Another officer added quietly, "The entire galaxy is watching." Veilora stepped toward the observation window. Outside, Her vast fleet floated beneath an ocean of crimson light. Every warship reflected the red sky across polished black hulls, as though already stained by a future decision. A new transmission request arrived unexpectedly. Source: Jack Morrison. Veolora accepted immediately. The human appeared once more. He looked exactly the same. Tired, dust-covered, calm. "You have turned your people into a shield," Veolora said. Jack shook his head gently. "No." He looked directly at her. "I introduced them." He paused. "If you attack, do it knowing exactly who you are attacking." Neither spoke afterward. Across the galaxy, billions continued reading human names beneath a red sky. And for the first time in her reign, Empress Veolora realized that conquest and certainty were not always the same thing. The crimson sky remained unchanged for the next 6 hours. Above Caldera, 9, the immense Orolith fleet drifted silently through seas of red light, while billions across known space continued watching. News networks interrupted regular broadcasts. Universities suspended lectures. Cargo captains altered routes simply to observe the transmission firsthand. Everywhere, people read human names. Everywhere, they asked the same question. What kind of civilization responded to an empire not with weapons, but with introductions? Aboard the Sovereign Dawn, tension spread quietly across the bridge. Military officers who had spent entire careers executing flawless campaigns now found themselves hesitating before tactical displays filled with children's photographs and hospital registries. One young officer finally broke the silence. "Your Majesty," she said cautiously, "my family has begun transmitting messages." Veolora turned. "Messages?" The officer lowered her eyes respectfully. "They wish to know whether Caldera, 9 truly shelters so many civilians." Around the bridge, several officers looked uncomfortable. They had received similar communications. Wives, parents, siblings, friends. Questions rather than praise. Curiosity rather than celebration. Empress Veolora dismissed the bridge staff for 1 hour. When the great chamber finally emptied, she remained alone beneath the crimson reflections washing across the observation windows. For decades, conquest had seemed simple. Worlds resisted. Empires expanded. History advanced. Yet the human had done something profoundly unsettling. He had transformed strategy into responsibility. A soft tone interrupted her thoughts. Another transmission request from Jack Morrison. Veolora accepted. This time, the human did not appear inside the operations center. He stood inside an underground shelter. Children sat behind him coloring pictures beneath emergency lighting. Volunteers distributed blankets and warm meals. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. The sound seemed strangely powerful. "You are with civilians," Veolora observed. Jack nodded. "Most of Caldera, 9 is underground right now." A small girl approached him carrying a drawing. Jack accepted it with a grateful smile before returning his attention to the screen. Veolora studied the image in silence. "Why are they not afraid?" she asked quietly. Jack looked around the shelter. "They are afraid." He paused. "But fear becomes smaller when people face it together." The Empress considered those words. "Your colony cannot defeat my fleet." "I know. Then why continue resisting?" Jack looked directly into her golden eyes. "Because surrendering people and surrendering territory are not the same thing." The answer lingered between them. After several moments, Veolora asked something no officer aboard her flagship would have expected. "How many children live on Caldera 9? Jack glanced toward a nearby terminal. 21,417. "You know the exact number." Jack looked almost surprised. "Of course." He gently folded the drawing still resting in his hand. "They trusted us to protect them." The transmission ended shortly afterward. Empress Veolora remained standing before the darkened screen long after the human disappeared. Outside, the crimson sky reflected endlessly across her fleet. For the first time since ascending the imperial throne, she found herself no longer asking whether Caldera 9 could be conquered. Instead, she wondered what kind of civilization counted every child before answering an empire. And somewhere deep within the silent flagship, certainty began to fade. 20 hours had passed since Red Lantern illuminated the heavens above Caldera 9. The crimson glow still covered the world like an endless sunset. Beneath it, life continued. Children slept inside shelters. Volunteers delivered meals. Doctors moved quietly between crowded medical stations. No one knew what the Empire would ultimately decide, but no one faced the uncertainty alone. Deep inside the Colonial Operations Center, Jack Morrison finally allowed himself 5 minutes of rest. He sat beside an old maintenance console, holding a paper cup filled with reheated coffee. It tasted terrible. He drank it anyway. Governor Elaine Brooks approached, carrying updated shelter reports. "No major incidents," she said softly. "People are holding together." Jack nodded. "Good." She studied him carefully. "You have not slept." "Neither have you." The governor smiled faintly. "True." Before either could continue, every monitor inside the operations center activated simultaneously. The seal of the Orlith Empire appeared across every screen. Conversations immediately stopped. Throughout the shelters beneath Red Harbor, families looked upward. Above them, aboard the Sovereign Dawn, Imperial officers stood silently along the bridge perimeter as Empress Veilora Thane stepped onto the command platform. The crimson light from Caldera 9 reflected across her silver-white hair and illuminated her golden eyes. She looked different. Not weaker, not uncertain, simply thoughtful. "Citizens of Caldera 9, she began, her voice carrying calmly across the colony. "The Orlith Empire has conquered 112 worlds during its history." She paused. "Until now, no civilization has ever answered surrender demands as you have." Across the galaxy, countless observers watched in silence. Veilora continued. "Your colony possesses no fleet capable of resisting us, no weapons capable of threatening us. Yet your response has forced the Empire to confront a question we have not asked for many generations." She looked directly toward the transmission camera. "What is the purpose of power if it cannot recognize the value of those living beneath it?" A quiet murmur spread through shelters across Caldera 9. In the operations center, Jack slowly set down his coffee. Veilora drew a slow breath. "Effective immediately, all military actions against Caldera 9 are suspended." The room around Jack erupted with disbelief. Some people cried openly. Others simply stared at the screens, unable to process what they had heard. But the Empress was not finished. "Furthermore, I am ordering Imperial humanitarian vessels to assist with infrastructure repairs and medical supply deliveries." Now even the officers aboard the Sovereign Dawn appeared surprised. Veilora ignored them. Humanity has reminded the Empire that civilizations are not measured solely by territory, fleets, or victories. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "They are measured by the names they refuse to abandon." The transmission ended. Silence filled the operations center for nearly 10 seconds. Then applause began. It spread slowly at first, then everywhere. Volunteers embraced. Technicians laughed through exhausted tears. Deep beneath the planet's surface, hope returned. Jack remained seated. He simply closed his eyes for a moment. Governor Brooks touched his shoulder gently. "You changed everything." Jack looked toward the crimson light still glowing softly through the shelter ventilation shafts. "No," he said quietly. "People did." Far above Caldera 9, Empress Veilora stood alone before the observation windows as the first Imperial medical ships descended peacefully toward the human colony. Beneath the red sky, an empire had chosen compassion, and the galaxy would remember. 3 days after the Imperial ceasefire, the shelters beneath Red Harbor finally began to empty. Heavy blast doors opened one after another, releasing families into sunlight they had not seen in nearly a week. Children emerged first. They always did. They stepped cautiously into the open streets, looked upward, and stopped. The sky above Caldera 9 remained red. Not with fear now, but with memory. Red lanterns still illuminated the atmosphere, its soft crimson glow stretching from horizon to horizon like an endless dawn. Yet something else had changed. Imperial ships no longer blocked the sun. Instead, sleek silver humanitarian vessels descended through the red clouds carrying medical supplies, water purification systems, and emergency infrastructure equipment. Across the colony, people watched in disbelief as alien crews worked beside human volunteers repairing damaged power grids and restoring communications arrays. Inside St. Miriam Medical Center, exhausted nurses accepted advanced medical processors from Imperial physicians who only days earlier had been considered invaders. Nobody quite knew how to behave, so they began with simple things: sharing tools, carrying equipment, offering coffee. Deep inside the Colonial Operations Center, Jack Morrison quietly monitored reconstruction reports while ancient Red Lantern systems continued transmitting overhead. Governor Elaine Brooks entered carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee. "Real coffee this time," she said. Jack accepted the cup gratefully. "The colony thanks you." The governor smiled. "The colony wants to name the Central Plaza after you." Jack nearly spilled his drink. "Please do not." Before Brooks could answer, an incoming transmission request appeared across the console. Source: Empress Veilora Thane. Jack accepted immediately. The holographic image appeared. Veilora stood alone within a quiet observation chamber aboard the Sovereign Dawn. Behind her, the crimson atmosphere of Caldera 9 reflected softly against enormous windows. "Mr. Morrison," she began, "I am traveling to the surface." Jack looked surprised. "Personally?" Veilora inclined her head slightly. "Empires often speak from orbit. I believe that may have been one of our mistakes." 2 hours later, for the first time in recorded history, an Orlith Empress walked openly through a human frontier colony. No ceremony had been prepared. No military escort marched before her. Veilora simply stepped from her shuttle into Red Harbor's central square while citizens quietly watched. Some remained cautious. Others merely curious. Children, however, behaved exactly as children always had. They approached without hesitation. One small boy looked up at the towering Empress and asked, "Are you the lady from the sky?" For the first time anyone aboard the Sovereign Dawn could remember, Empress Veilora laughed softly. "Yes," she answered. "I suppose I am." Jack guided her through the recovering colony. Schools reopening. Markets returning. Families planting flowers beside shelter entrances. Finally, they stopped atop a ridge overlooking Red Harbor. The red sky stretched endlessly above them. Veilora looked upward. "Your answer changed more than this colony," she said quietly. "Reports indicate several Imperial governors have requested civilian accountability systems similar to Red Lantern." Jack remained silent. "You have altered the Empire," Veilora continued. Jack shook his head gently. "No." He looked toward children playing below. "People changed the Empire. They just needed to be seen." The Empress said nothing afterward. Together, human and rulers stood beneath the crimson heavens, watching life return to Caldera 9. And somewhere beyond the stars, other civilizations had already begun counting names before counting victories. 6 months later, visitors arriving at Caldera 9 often asked the same question. They would step from transport shuttles, look up at the faint crimson glow still lingering high within the atmosphere, and ask why the sky remained red long after the crisis had ended. The people of Red Harbor always smiled before answering. "Because we promised never to forget." Red Lantern no longer operated continuously. Most of its ancient systems had been retired once reconstruction was complete. Yet every evening, exactly at sunset, thousands of beacon towers across Caldera 9 awakened for 10 minutes. The sky turned crimson once more, and every citizen stopped whatever they were doing. Children paused their games. Miners removed their helmets. Store owners stepped outside. Together, they read names. Not just the names of those who had lived through the Imperial blockade, but the names of every new child born on the colony since then. It had become tradition, a reminder that people mattered before politics, before territory, before fear. On a cool autumn evening, Jack Morrison stood atop Observatory Ridge overlooking Red Harbor. The colony looked different now. New schools had been built. Fresh gardens covered areas once occupied by emergency shelters. Alien and human cargo ships shared the same landing fields below. Laughter drifted upward on the evening wind. Jack held a warm cup of coffee while watching children chase one another beneath strings of festival lights. Footsteps approached behind him. He did not turn. "You are late," he said quietly. Empress Veilora Thane stepped beside him, silver-white hair moving softly in the breeze. "Imperial schedules remain inefficient," she replied with the faintest trace of humor. Much had changed since her first arrival. The Orlith Empire had established civilian accountability networks throughout its territories. Entire military academies now studied Red Lantern as a lesson in leadership. Across known space, people simply called it the Crimson Answer. Veilora looked toward the colony below. Today the Imperial Senate approved the final reforms. Jack glanced toward her. "How did the vote go?" The Empress looked upward as the first crimson lights began awakening across the horizon. Unanimous. For several moments, neither spoke. They simply watched as beacon after beacon ignited across Caldera 9. Slowly, the heavens transformed once more into a sea of red light. Children below pointed excitedly toward the sky. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang softly. Jack finally asked, "Do you ever regret coming here?" Veolora considered the question carefully. "I arrived expecting surrender." She watched the crimson sky reflected within her golden eyes. Instead, humanity taught an empire how to see. Silence followed. Comfortable silence. The kind shared by people who no longer needed explanations. Far below, a young girl read newly added names aloud while families listened quietly beneath the red heavens. Jack recognized several. New births. New beginnings. Life continuing. As darkness settled over Caldera 9, Empress and humans stood side by side, overlooking a world that had refused to abandon its people. Above them, the crimson sky glowed gently against the stars. And across the galaxy, civilizations that once measured power in fleets and conquest had begun measuring something else. Because one quiet human had answered an empire with names. And somehow, that answer had changed the stars forever.